The smoke-filled back room, where deals are struck and political fortunes are made. Well, in Philadelphia, right after the signing of the Constitution, the most important smoke-filled back room was in the drawing room on the second floor at 224 South 3rd Street. And the hostess was one of the most influential people in early America. Today, we'll be talking with Samantha Snyder about Elizabeth Willing Powel, her political power, her husband, and how she saved the country. This is Too Complicated for History.
Today's guest is Samantha Snyder, a writer and the reference librarian at George Washington's Mount Vernon. Hey, Samantha, thanks for being here with us.
Hi, Lynn. I'm very happy to join you today.
So I'm really excited because you're going to talk about your favorite historical lady today. So why don't you tell everyone who that is?
Sure. My favorite historical lady of all time is a woman named Elizabeth Willing Powel. She is a Philadelphian lady who was alive through most of the 18th century and into the 19th century. And she was a very well-known figure amongst the political world, amongst the social world of Philadelphia. She was quite a superstar, and she was very close with George Washington and numerous other founding figures.
You know, talking about important Philadelphian. See, this makes me excited for this episode.
Yeah, because Philly is the best.
Yes, it is.
Hey, I'm from Pittsburgh.
Lynn.
I've grown so fond of
yes,
it.
Yes, it is, Lynn.
It is, Lynn. Sorry.
So, could you tell us a little bit about where she was born? What was she from? An important family? Did she marry into an important family? Was her a little bit of her early life like?
So Elizabeth was born into a very important family and did eventually marry into an important family, but her family was the Willing family. They were a merchant family. Her father was one of the most important merchants in Philadelphia. He was a part of the triangle trade, so he was doing a lot of shipping from Barbados and the West Indies and England, including enslaved people. So that was where part of the wealth of the family came from. But she was one of 10 siblings too. She was sibling number 6. So her family was quite a dynasty of the time, and she was very popular, as were her sisters. She had 5 other sisters and 4 brothers. So then she eventually did marry into an important family, the Powel family, who were also a merchant family. And yeah, so she was important from the start and quite popular from the start.
She really was the middle child, wasn't she? I mean, in a way
She really was, which I love. Once I kind of figured that out and learned more about her, I was like, oh, I can see the middle childness in it all. She definitely was quite a powerful woman, but I think she probably had to embody that very young to make herself heard. So she was definitely lived up to a middle child stereotype.
I think it's really funny. At a time like that in the 18th century Philadelphia, for these important families, what was the social atmosphere like? So her coming up as part of this family, would she have been paid? You said she was popular, but would she have been paid attention to? Would there have been stuff written about her? What? Because I'm imagining in my head the 1920s for whatever reason.
Reported in the papers.
Yeah,
and stuff,
the papers and things exactly. Was there that kind of stuff going on, or was it the community a little bit different, or the press a little bit different back then?
So for her, the community was a little different back then. I would say the comparison to a page 6 or written up in the newspapers would actually be reading other people's letters and seeing if they're talked about in those letters. And she and her sisters were talked about quite a bit amongst some of the kind of younger men of the town, which all of these men grew up to be very important figures. Francis Hopkinson, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, John Dickinson, Benjamin Rush, all of these Philadelphian men, but especially the soldiers in the French and Indian War. They came about, that all started when Elizabeth and her sisters were really coming of age, and they were hanging out with them quite a bit. And one of the soldiers called them the Three Goddesses. It was her and her two older sisters. So they were quite popular with them. And kind of how they would have come into their own and socializing with people would have started mostly at assemblies. So assemblies were basically one large dance where everybody would come. You had to have a subscription, and the Willing family did subscribe. So when they were teenagers, they would have gone and started dancing with other people and meeting other eligible men and different things like that. So that's really how it would have been, mostly other people's letters.
Gotcha.
So a question that just popped in my mind is, we talked about how she's a middle child and, she became very well known. What happened to her other sisters? Obviously they were goddesses. So, they were as attractive as she was, but were they the same level of success as she was?
Her sisters, I would say, achieved a similar level of success, but not to the level she did. Her sisters all had children, which actually in the 18th century really was a route that women would take. Elizabeth lost all of her children, so she really had a different path in life to become this kind of social figure, this sort of queen of Philadelphia, versus her sisters. But one of her sisters is a woman named Mary Willing Bird, who was a large plantation owner in Southern Virginia. Another sister, Anne Willing Francis, was one of the women who helped start the Ladies Society of Philadelphia, I believe it's called, who compiled all of that money to donate to the Continental Army in 1780. So they were popular as well, and they were all very close. But I would say they were a little bit in her shadow throughout the 18th century.
That's a curious scenario that she lost her children. It wasn't like by choice that she didn't have kids. Right?
No, not at all.
She lost her children, and then by virtue of having that sort of space in her life, ended up achieving a lot, or doing a lot, or becoming influential. Curious on that.
Definitely. And that's one of the things that, as I've studied her and learned more about women's history in general, that's kind of something I've realized. I'm like, it's interesting to think about what her life would have been like had she not lost her children. Like, would she have led a less public life? Would she have still had the hold she had on society if she had had children? And it's not to say she wouldn't have still had that sort of sparkling, commanding personality, but it would have been very different to have. I mean, she had 4 children, all pass away. So to have 4 children running around their house would have been such a different environment than her and her husband and their 4 servants. Alone.
Yeah, because a lot of family focus went towards child rearing, like that. They were a reflection on you. Yes. They were something that you worked towards and worked on at that level of society at the time. Lynn and I have had conversations about how George Washington and Martha Washington's lives may have changed had their daughter not died.
Right.
Absolutely. That could have changed. Absolutely.
It would have changed the dynamic of Martha in the war. Like, it would have been, we think of parents today as more attentive to their kids, but children were very important, especially at that upper level of upper crust society at the time.
Yes, because they carried on the legacy of the family. And I mean, Elizabeth did, you could tell her whole life she definitely did want to be a mother, and did kind of pick and choose throughout her many nieces and nephews who she was going to spend the most time sort of fostering their place in society. And her siblings, she ended up, I think by the time she was around 43, 44, she had, I think, 29 nieces and nephews.
That family is prolific.
I know. And the wild thing is, too, as I've been studying her and reading all of her letters, there's so many names that I had to make a family tree. Early in my time doing research, I already have an Ancestry.com subscription, so I made this whole family tree to figure out who was who, because it was just like too many names. And she lived so long that she's writing to generation after generation of people. So they definitely loved that trend of naming everybody the same thing.
That's exactly what I was about to ask. Did they recycle names?
Yes.
Because that was always with Martha and George Washington. That could just make your head explode. I remember Martha is Martha Dandridge Custis Washington. And she had, I believe, a niece named Martha Washington Dandridge. So like they swapped it.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And it's maddening.
Exactly. It is. And since there were so many Willing siblings, each sibling named their children after the other Willing siblings. And then some of the children married their cousins. So then there's some duplicate last names and things just get really weird. And so
I feel like we've gone in the complete opposite direction today. There's like, I want to name my child something that's never been a name before. I will name him Papaya.
Exactly.
And
or microwave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or whatever Elon Musk named his child, string of letters and numbers.
ZXY Aeon Flux. Positive, negative sign. Whatever the hell the kid's name.
Yeah, yell it out when you're mad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit different back in the 18th century. So
a little bit.
She didn't have kids, but we haven't brought up her husband, who was also an important guy.
Yes, he was. Her husband's name is Samuel Powel. And Samuel was just a couple years older than her, and he came from a merchant family as well. He was the oldest son of the family, and he had 3 sisters. And so he was very well educated, went to the Academy of Philadelphia, which was the precursor to University of Pennsylvania. So he was quite well educated and went to school with 2 of Elizabeth's brothers. So I don't know if they were friends or not. I've never figured that out, but there weren't that many people who lived in Philadelphia at that time. But he ended up going on a grand tour of Europe, which was very common for upper crust men to do. And his tour lasted 3 times as long as a normal tour. So that means he was traveling all across Europe and England. He went to Italy and Switzerland and Holland and France and all over the place. But he definitely developed quite a reputation as being this learned gentleman. And Samuel and Elizabeth ended up getting married in 1769. And they really had a special relationship. They seemed to be equals in a lot of ways, which was kind of somewhat rare for that
like
period.
A power couple.
Yes, a power couple. I often call them a political power couple.
The George and Amal Clooney of the time.
Yes, exactly. And I think Amal Clooney is more of a badass than George Clooney. So I think the same kind of goes for Elizabeth and Samuel. No offense to Samuel.
Or George Clooney, I guess.
Or George Clooney, I guess. Consider it.
If you happen to be a listener,
how old were they?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, George, sorry, not sorry. But you ask how old
were they when they got married? Because I think I remember you telling me something about Samuel being a bachelor and being kind of pushed to get married because, you didn't want to be a bachelor back then.
No, he managed to, although he had a crush on a girl in England named Esther de Bere, who married a man named Joseph Reed, and they lived in Philadelphia.
Esther.
Oh, I know. And she's pretty mean about him in her letters, and it's very sad. She's like, because she's secretly in a relationship with Joseph Reed, so she's kind of Samuel's kind of trying to court her, and it's not working because she's betrothed to someone else. But it's very funny. But yes, when he gets back, he lives with one of his best friends and his best friend's wife. And at first, his best friend is really excited. His name is John Morgan. He was a very powerful doctor in Philadelphia, started the first medical school in Philadelphia. But John is very excited. They're going to basically pal around together like they did when they were abroad. But then a few months later, he writes to a friend in England and he's like, well, Samuel still won't leave, basically. And he's like, he's building 2 houses, but he's not planning to live in them. He seems open to the idea of marriage, but he's not making any steps to do it. So yes, he kind of wanted to be an eternal bachelor, it seems. And Elizabeth herself was seemingly a little bit similar. She turned down a few proposals throughout the 1760s before finally saying yes to Samuel. Somehow. I've not figured out how.
Not to go on a tangent, but is this Joseph Reed as in like George Washington's aide-de-camp, Joseph Reed?
Yes,
wow.
it is. It is indeed his aide-de-camp.
That guy
yeah.
is a guy.
Yes, he's a guy.
Well, the only thing that I know really about him is specifically is that at one point there was another general during the war that was trying to undermine Washington named General Charles Lee. Mm-hmm. And he was writing to Joseph Reed about how he wasn't going to rendezvous at this particular time. And Washington caught wind of it by opening a letter that addressed to Joseph and eventually writing him and be like, listen, man, I see you're trying to undercut me. What the hell, basically. That's his claim to fame as Washington's aide-de-camp.
Yep.
Sounds like a great couple.
Right.
Great. Yeah.
Samuel's better off without Esther.
I think so. And they seemed to socialize when they were both in Philly, both couples. And I'm like, did they ever talk about the fact that Samuel was pining after Esther years prior? Like, I have to wonder if that ever came up.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Samuel must have been pretty, there was something special about him if she's turning all these other men down. I mean, she seems like she was quite a catch. I mean, I imagine he was too, but I feel like she was probably more of a catch.
Oh, yes, I think so. I don't think he had the same luck in relationships as she did. Although she kind of like Nellie Custis. Nellie fends off a lot of rumors about engagements before she's actually engaged to Lawrence Lewis. Elizabeth had the same problem with one rumor that she was engaged to John Dickinson. And that more so, I think, came about. It was as widely talked of in Philadelphia as it was in Southern Virginia somehow, because her sister must have sent this letter asking if she's engaged to John Dickinson, and she says no. And I think it might have come about because she was very complimentary of his letters from a Pennsylvania farmer, which was a political publication. And I think she was quite passionate about many things, and it might have come off a little bit like she was trying to marry him, I guess.
Just for context for our listeners, letters at the time weren't terribly private things, right?
No. They could easily get intercepted or lost. If you trusted someone to carry a letter for you, you don't know what they're going to do with it. But they were not nearly as private as we would think of now.
Yeah, because I imagine, when you're saying like, oh, everyone's reading each other's letters, and she wrote a letter, and that's how the rumor got started. It seems a little bit intrusive.
Yeah.
Like someone was listening in on a phone call or something. But people often wrote letters with the assumption that they may be read by other people besides the
other
recipient,
people. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love the fact that back then gossip was just as kind of juicy as it is today.
Oh, I know. And when I figured out when I unpacked the 18th century language, I was like, oh, wait, somehow this rumor of her engagement went all the way down to like the Williamsburg area, I would guess. And I was like, man, people really were gunning for her to get married.
And isn't that interesting why they were so interested in that? Why they're so concerned?
Yeah.
Is it? It's so explainable. Like, I feel so natural though. Like that's a famous-ish person, right? Like, we do that all the time now. Pete Davidson is,
like
I've seen Pete, not to pinpoint when we're recording this episode, but I have seen like 30 pictures of Pete Davidson with Kim Kardashian over the last week.
Yeah, you're right.
And like 6 articles about whether they're dating or not. And I'm like, what? Who cares? But it's the same
and you
thing.
know, I think that Elizabeth, because the more and more I find about her and her sisters written up about all throughout the early 1760s, they were, I think, of the top of the powerful ladies of that era, the popular and like eligible ladies. So I think Elizabeth, especially as she continued on not getting married, I think people were like, what does this mean? Like, she's so great. And she's so, so she was a bit of a celebrity, I think, in a way.
Yeah. And like you said, there weren't a lot of people. So
no, there weren't. No, there really
were
weren't.
options.
So yeah. And I think it's so interesting that she and Samuel would not have ever like been together from 1760 to the end of 1767 because he was in Europe. So there's no sort of like, oh, did they like start talking to each other for a couple of years? It's like, no, he gets back and then a year and a half later they're married. So something must have had her change her mind about getting married in him.
He was a special guy, apparently.
Yeah.
So they after they get married, they move on, like they continue to actually move up in society, right? Like together I mean, they're pretty high up to begin with, but they continue to accomplish things. They don't just sort of like rest on the laurels, like bet on dog races and kind of like just generally hang, which you do. A lot of people did.
Yeah, they definitely they definitely continue to rise in the ranks in society, and they buy a house, a beautiful townhouse that actually still exists. It's a historic house museum in Philadelphia. So, and it's called the Powel House.
And you might have been there before, Sam.
And I might have been there before. I might have even gotten to stay overnight there before.
In their bed?
So cool.
Oh my goodness. That's gross.
Sorry, that's probably so loud. No, on a couch in what probably was their kitchen. Sorry, Kayla, you'll be listening to this.
Every historian is jealous, don't worry.
Yes, yeah, no, and so I got to stay there, which was wonderful, but no creepy hauntings.
That's
so that I guess that's a good thing, but also
that's unfortunate. Although I could see a scenario where it would go terribly wrong, where the ghost of Elizabeth Powel comes back and she's like, "Listen, I've read your manuscript. Here's where everything is wrong."
Yeah, everything is wrong. You got this wrong. You got this wrong.
She's like, "I have some notes."
Yeah,
she's just flipping through the pages.
Yes, just like. Page 1, page 2. Yeah. And like forces me to rewrite it with her in front of me. Like, you will rewrite this and you will do it now.
Right.
So anyway, yes, they build this, or they buy a home, and it's actually just down the street from where she grew up, which is kind of fun. That it was she lived on 3rd Street for almost 60 years on this same street. But this house is beautiful. And with his money and the things he brought back from his time abroad, so he brought back beautiful paintings and statues and was always buying the best furniture. They really developed this beautiful home that was very much a reception space for just about anybody and everybody in Philadelphia. And one really special part about their house that was very rare for that era was they had a ballroom in their house. So that gave them a level up to start entertaining people a lot easier than having people always have to go to an assembly and stuff like that. They came to the Powell's house. So,
like a little private club.
Yeah, like a little private club. I like that. Yes.
They really are the power couple of Philadelphia, aren't they?
They really are. They really are the power couple. I laid out documents for a tour the other day, one of a letter of his and one of a letter of hers. And I didn't say anything. So I just did it just because it fit with the theme of the tour. But people were like, oh, were they related? I was like, yes, they are the political power couple of Philadelphia. Were they related? I'm like, well,
in a fashion.
Yes, in a fashion. They were not. So I will say they were not cousins. They were not related in the
That actually
slightest.
is a good question.
It really is
very
a good
twisted
question.
way.
Yes.
For marriage is neat, but were they related?
It wasn't uncommon back then,
No,
right? For
yeah.
even first cousins.
It was not.
If you have a family fortune, you want to make sure you keep it in the family, and
You want to make sure you keep it. And
Yeah, if you have
the bloodline
a family fortune and no understanding of heritable genetic conditions, yes, that's
exactly. What could go wrong?
Yes.
what could go wrong.
Yeah.
But Samuel actually has a pretty successful political career, right?
He does. Samuel does have a successful political career. He is first elected to kind of some local political positions. He's in the Common Council, but then he becomes mayor of Philadelphia, which might not sound like it was that big of a deal now. We think of mayors a little differently now, but they were very much powerful figures in the city. So he was the last mayor under the first Pennsylvania charter, and then 13 years later, he was appointed the first mayor under the new charter. So after the war and the Pennsylvania becoming a state, I guess.
Yeah, and Philadelphia, this is the chip on my shoulder as a Philadelphian, was very important at the time. Arguably more important than New York.
100% agree. I have developed such affinity and realization that Philly was so important and had more people in it than New York, had better plays, had better art, more powerful figures. I think Philly was far superior.
To be the mayor of Philadelphia is, a big deal.
A big deal. Exactly. Yes, it's a very big deal. You're right. And he does become Speaker of the State Senate years later. So he also hits state politics eventually, but he never served in a national political position, which I've always found kind of interesting because he was so involved in politics and political knowledge, but he had so close with so many politicians, but he just never took that step to join that. And I don't really know why, but he seemed to live a very full life regardless.
So sorry for the interruption, but we're going to take a brief break now for a word from our sponsors.
So this is just your opinion as an expert on Elizabeth Powell. Do you think she sort of had a little bug in his ear and would talk to him about political issues while he was in office? And you think they would talk things out and she would have an influence on him?
I think so. I think she would have an influence on him. There's not a lot of, primary sources from that period between the two of them, but she was so intelligent and he was so intelligent and seemed to really admire her mind in a way, and she admired his, and she was very knowledgeable about politics, even if she didn't like to admit it in letters to people. Other people, of course, talk about how smart she was and how she has some of the most best political knowledge that they've ever seen. And so, yes, I would say she probably did, considering she was so influential on George Washington years later.
Yeah, I was going to say there's precedent.
Yeah.
There is
for her
precedent.
Expressing her opinion and having influence.
Yes, for kind of the top guy in the United States, like in the early United States.
Wait, could you just summarize really quick what she did? There's a very specific incident that we're referencing.
Yes.
Could you share that with our listeners?
So the kind of peak moment of Elizabeth Powell's influence in politics, either like local, state, or national level, is when her very dear friend George Washington is deciding whether or not he wants to serve a second term in office. And he's very, very on the fence and is leaning towards not serving a second term. And she, after seemingly conversation after conversation with him, finally just decides to write him a very strongly worded letter. And like we were saying, letters weren't private. So she kind of did this, I think, as a little bit of a political tool too, that if someone saw it, they'd be like, oh my God, like he what is he doing? And so it's almost like he had to listen to her once she wrote this letter. But it's an amazing letter. It's full of just like reason after reason why he should serve a second term. She's very targets his emotions and his insecurities and all sorts of things. It's a really powerful letter, and I like to think that it was the final reason, the final thing that made him think, okay, I need to do this again. So, but that's just my opinion.
Well, it did happen fairly timeline wise. It would make sense.
Yes, it does. Yes, I should say it did happen right before the election process for the second term started. So that November. And she even makes that very clear. She's like, we've talked about this so much. And I thought by this point, it's so close to the start of everything. Like, I thought you would have gotten over this by now, basically. So
and he had a lot of his male colleagues and male politicians trying to talk him into running, but they were using different strategies than her.
Yes, they were. They were definitely, she had the ability to target his emotions in a way that they didn't. They were having to, and he probably listened to her in a different way that he wouldn't have for them, because it was less political gain for her than it was for them, even though she was very focused on continuing, like, saving the country. It was, she could also use her status as a woman in his life, a friend, a female friend, to target the emotions behind the politics.
Because George and Martha and Sam and Elizabeth, they were like couple friends. Like they were like, oh, you know, like, we'll have dinner with you guys on a regular basis, kind of couple friends. Like, that's a way to think about it.
Yes. They were definitely couple friends, which I love. I think that's really fun and something that's kind of not talked about a lot in the grand scheme of Elizabeth and George and their friendship. It's more focusing on them. And I wouldn't say Samuel and Martha were super close, right. But I think as a whole, they were very much couple friends. And Samuel and George had quite a friendship too, based around agriculture. They both loved farming, and so I think that's kind of fun.
Yeah, they have a lot of do they have a lot of conversations about seeds? Am I remembering that correctly?
They do. They do have a lot of conversations about seeds.
Are they farmer nerds?
They are farmer nerds. And actually, the other day, I just found a letter when I was doing some internet sleuthing where George writes to Samuel in the 1790s. Samuel gets this fancy new threshing machine, and he's very proud of it. And I knew that they went to go see it because George writes about it in his diary. But turns out they were supposed to go on a different day, and they don't go on this day because George writes to Samuel and says, "Hey, I just remembered that I have to get back to the city by 2:00 and you don't want to leave till 11. And then he says something like, "Query, do you think we have enough time to see it in full operation before we have to go back to the city?" And he's like, "Please answer in the affirmative or the negative." And so it's like the nerdiest letter I've ever read.
I love stating like query in a conversation.
It reminds me of like the little kids. Do you like me? Check yes or no.
That's basically what the letter seems like. And if only there was a reply, because I can only imagine Samuel being like, "Answer. No, that's not enough time." And they do end up leaving much earlier, and they don't get back until much later. So I'm like, clearly they needed more time to stand and stare.
Listen, well, you got to inspect the thresher.
Farming.
I mean, how are you going to know if it's a good thresher if you don't thoroughly inspect the thresher? Does it thresh?
If you don't thoroughly inspect it,
I have no idea what a thresher does.
Right?
I don't
zero clue what that machine is for.
I don't either. If there's agriculture experts listening to this,
producer want to like look up what a thresher is and maybe give a brief description for us. Thank you.
I feel like if I ever wanted to think of Samuel and George as sort of dads, sort of like the quintessential dad or nerd,
looking at their lawn.
Exactly.
with their hands on their hips, like,
Right?
with jeans and tucked in polo shirts.
yes.
No belts. No
And
belts.
no belts. No. But New Balance shoes. They've got to have. the
Okay,
New
so we
Balance
have an
shoes.
answer. A threshing machine is a piece of farming equipment that threshes grain. Unuseful. It removes the seeds of the stalks and the husks, so it separates the stuff. Like the that's yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Totally need
Cool.
hours to watch
Cool.
that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Oh man, I'm just imagining them in like
That's awesome.
God.
I know. That's the best part about history is just making these people.
Relatable.
So I want to get to there's a really like sort of like their couple friendship has like a sad end to it a little bit, which and frustrating one as well.
A very frustrating. I know exactly what you're talking
Lynn,
about.
could you give us a little bit of a heads up on just before we hand it off to Sam to describe how what is like yellow fever?
The part that I learned about early, I was working on the Martha Washington papers, and I get this. I see this letter from Elizabeth Powell, and she said, she had been invited to Mount Vernon to stay with the Washingtons. I believe she and Samuel were the only ones invited to stay because there was a yellow fever epidemic and everyone was getting out of the city because it's, easily transmissible. And so they invited their couple friends, Elizabeth and Samuel, to Mount Vernon to, sort of wait out the epidemic. And you can explain, Sam, what Samuel's response was to that.
Yes. I just shake my head. And with everything happening with COVID over these past 2 years and this sort of stuff, I'm like, he says he doesn't want to go because he thinks that everybody is slightly overreacting and that they are safer in the city, surrounded by doctors who know how to treat the disorder versus going states away to where there's no threat of yellow fever. That's what I don't understand. But what's very sweet and very sad is that he says he wants Elizabeth to make her own decision because it's a matter that could affect her life and his happiness. So it's like he doesn't want her to die. And so she decides to stay because she says she doesn't want to leave him because if he was to get sick, it would affect her life or his life and her happiness. But then sadly, she ends up going to her brother's house in the western lands of Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And Samuel catches yellow fever and passes away less than 3 weeks after Elizabeth sends that letter. So,
was there any political or work-related reason for him to stay? Like, did he need to be there, or was it just sort of like I'm being kind of lazy in my?
It's very weird. There's mixed stories about whether he needed to be there for political reasons or if he just was staying to stay. He was Speaker of the State Senate at that point and actually writes a letter a couple weeks prior to a very, very infamous doctor named Benjamin Rush asking about the yellow fever and if he should shut the city down, basically. So clearly he had quite a sway in politics at that point. And Benjamin Rush is like, yes, shut it down.
I just want to point out that is the term for Benjamin Rush infamous? Is that the right versus famous?
Infamous in that he was the I don't know if our listeners have heard of bloodletting, but he was that was his method of he would let blood for
treating most things.
Treating most things, literally like everything. He was like, oh, gotta let some blood. But Samuel stays and he goes out to Richland, where she was. That was the name of her brother's estate. Very, very British to name your estates. His name was Richard. So
Richland.
Richland.
Oh
okay, makes sense.
And he goes out once, but then he doesn't come back, and then he dies. So yeah.
I mean, whether or not I didn't mean to call him lazy. It's more like You know how when there's like a hurricane coming to like a, that's hitting the eastern seaboard and they're like, everyone evacuate. And then there's a subset of people who are just like, no, right?
Yes,
for whatever reason, like there's a weird psychological something happening with those folks that like, I'd rather just stay. And sort of be part of like, and try to ride it out rather than leave, even though that seems like the logical decision. Is to just get away.
That's kind of how I read into it a little bit, is that he just kind of was like, well, I'll just stay. I'll just protect myself, but I want my wife to go be safe, even though I'm not going to join her. Though I've seen mentions of family members saying he meant to join her. He did join her, but then went back to the city. It's a little weird. I don't quite know how it all unfolded, but then he does get taken to their Western home called Powelton, and that's where he dies.
It's called Powelton.
So Powelton, which of course Powelton, Richland, like.
So our producer has given us some of the symptoms of yellow fever. So some of the things that, and I don't know if I heard this, I would probably leave. Mild cases, these are the mild ones: fever, headache, nausea, and vomiting. Serious cases can cause fatal heart, liver, and kidney conditions. And it's spread by mosquitoes, but they didn't know that. They didn't know what was spreading it.
Yeah, we don't even have treatments for it today, really. Nothing specific. Like you treat the symptoms and then deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Benjamin Rush Benjamin Rush was the main doctor kind of treating everybody during the yellow fever, which he probably killed more.
Let me just drain all your blood. You'll feel better.
Benjamin Rush. We'll talk about Benjamin Rush in detail another time. But I mean, yes, he did collect copious amounts of blood from people. he did accomplish a fair amount in the medical field.
He was a vampire.
He did indeed. He accomplished a lot in the medical field. Was one of the first people to come out in support of women's education, which actually he dedicates his speech on women's education to Elizabeth Powell by name. So they were friends, and they were Benjamin Rush and Samuel Powell were friends. He's not Dracula. Okay. He's not Dracula.
We can agree to disagree.
There's one more little thing. That's incredibly sad. That Sam dies.
I know.
Even though he had a chance to get out. There's one last little tidbit that, and this is sort of like a spicier anecdote that you've told me in the past about Elizabeth post Samuel passing away.
Yes.
There was another Washington that Elizabeth had like a close friendship with, right?
Yes. That she was quite close with Bushrod Washington, who was George Washington's nephew. And Bushrod Washington actually was the one who inherited Mount Vernon after Martha Washington dies. But that's years later, after when Elizabeth meets Bushrod, he's a little up-and-comer law student, and he's in his early 20s, and he develops quite a crush on her, and she eats it up.
For those who don't know, the Washington men have a proclivity to have crushes on older women.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
That's sort of a thing in the Washington family for some reason.
Yes. And I would compare slightly, she's 20 years older than Bushrod, I think, so a little bit different than George Washington and Sally Fairfax, but very similar in the way that they were like, it's like puppy love for those young men. And they're helping, like Elizabeth helped him kind of become this like strong young man, but did it through like, it was a very much those who tease you love you more moment, I think, or moments where there's some really wonderful letters where he writes back to his mother. This is before Samuel dies. This is in the 1780s. And he writes back to his mother twice or three times about different anecdotes. But one of them, he is having his portrait painted. And he actually asked the Powells which artists they liked better, and they gave him, their opinions. But then one day he writes this anecdote to his mother that he and Mrs. Powell were talking about virtues of painters, and he has an artist named Henry Benbridge paint him eventually. And so he asks, or he says something about how Benbridge would be lucky to paint him. That's somehow he says something like that. And then Elizabeth latches on to it. He's like, and Bushrod writes like, I knew she wouldn't be silent about this. I knew it. And so then she's like, oh, he's lucky to paint you? Well, you think yourself a perfect Adonis. Like, and then he starts kind of spinning. You could tell he's spinning out a little bit. And he says like, he started blushing and wished he was tongue-tied because he was so embarrassed, but knew that it was coming from a place of love or something. And he also tells his mother that my favorite thing is that his friendship increases for her every day and he doesn't know when it will end. That's what he says about Elizabeth.
She's got him totally Mrs. Robinson.
She totally has him Mrs. Robinson. And she also buys him a watch chain, and because he comes over to their house and she doesn't like the watch chain he's wearing, and he was very proud of it. But then she buys him a new one and says, never wear the watch string you wore in my house ever again. And he's so proud of this watch string. Oh my God.
Can you please tell us the anecdote about when he stopped writing to her for a while?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So, yes. It's one of my favorites. So Bushrod finishes up in Philadelphia and goes back to Virginia. And he's in Philly, I think. Lynn, you would know. How long was he in Philadelphia?
Well, he was studying under James Wilson. He was studying. Yes. So I think he was there. It was a year or two. It was no longer than that.
Yeah. No longer than that. Yeah. And so when he's back, Elizabeth is upset because Bushrod hasn't written she says to Samuel, but then she's upset because he's not written to them. So she finally sends him a letter on New Year's Day. She was one to give gifts on New Year's Day. That throughout her whole life, she's always giving gifts. But she says, like, I've not heard from you since you left Philadelphia, but I can't blame your silence on the fact like that anything's like that you're ignoring me or anything like that. So I'm going to send you these fur-lined gloves for your Herculean hands that must have frostbite. That's the only reason why you haven't written me. So I'm sending you these gloves. And then 5 months later, she writes him another letter and she starts messing with him. People kind of tend to think this letter is very much her teaching him manners and how to write to men first instead of women. But she's like, you've sent me 3 letters over the past few months, and you haven't written to Mr. Powell, so I'm not going to write you back, but I'm breaking my rule and writing you back since you've written me so much. And I'm like, well, he's gotten a letter from you 6 months prior saying, here's some gloves because your hands must be frostbite. And then she's turning around. And so he overcompensates, I think, and writes her 3 letters.
Well, she's just teasing him.
She's teasing him. Exactly. And then the whole letter is full of like, make sure you're doing this and make sure you're doing that. And she sends him a book, but then she tells him she hears he's not very healthy and he needs to stop dancing so much and going to these dances and inhaling the vapors of candles. And then near the end, she said, my habit of admonishing you still prevails, but as you know, the spirit in which this hand dictates this, like, you won't be upset. So clearly she knows that she's constantly teasing him too, but I think that was her way of showing love.
And in regards to the Herculean hands, I just want to ask our listeners to look up an image of Bushrod Washington when you have a chance, because he's a very skinny little guy. So it just makes it a little more amusing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. He was a little guy. But yeah, I just love that he writes 3 letters and just like clearly overcompensates because he had such a crush on her. He's like, oh, I can't write her only once.
Like, stop texting me so much, basically.
Yeah, stop texting me so much. Like, I'll get back to you when I get back
She's
to
like,
you.
my husband's going to get mad.
Exactly. Like, chill out.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, Sam, before we run out of time, it's a two-part question, but I'll ask both. So maybe you can give the first part in context of the second part. So what originally drew you to working and researching on Elizabeth Powell? Because I think that's an interesting area of study, given that like her name isn't on any of the famous documents. She didn't sign, like she's not like part of in the meeting when the treaty is struck. She's not like what you would traditionally think is like the history maker. But he clearly had a lot of influence on the people around her, clearly was a significant person in her time. And is that part of a trend that you're seeing in history now to sort of explore these other figures as opposed to just the people that were sort of in the room when the big important thing happened? Or was it just a personal sort of proclivity?
Well, it started as a personal thing and has spun into kind of this whole finding hidden figures and that sort of stuff. But it really started because I'm lucky enough to work at an institution that has a big collection of letters between her and the Washingtons. And so I just started digging into those, and specifically the letter where she's writing to George Washington about running for president. I just was like, who is this woman? And then it all went from there. But I just was really drawn to her spirit and her humor, and just the fact that she's woven into so many stories but never talked about. Like the fact that she pops up in so many different people's letters and clearly had such an effect on so many people, but yet her story is never told on its own. So I think she fits in well with that narrative of women. A lot of times it's women whose stories are kind of understudied, but I think she has a level of importance that is I would put her among the ranks, if not higher than Abigail Adams, and that's a big statement. But I just
fired.
think like, shots fired. But she was there. She was like in Philadelphia. Abigail Adams wasn't, or not always. But she did love Abigail. She loved Abigail, and that's a whole other story. Her and John and Abigail. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Lynn, do you think that there's a lot of value in finding more of these? What effect, so say if we're going 5 years in the future and more work like the work that Sam's doing on Elizabeth is published, what effect do you think that has on the public's perception of history? I think it's a unique project and a unique person to study.
Absolutely.
And I kind of want to, figure out what is it unique? Why do I have this weird intrinsic feeling that it will bring a lot of value?
Because it makes it a fuller story. So even with George Washington taking a second term, all we've ever heard are these men who are writing to him and talking to him and saying, run for a second term. I never learned about Elizabeth Powell until
Exactly.
Samantha. And really, when you read it, you think that is probably what tipped him more than any other letter. And so you're expanding the story, and sometimes that feels like you're changing the story or you're, revising it. But the truth is you're just adding more perspectives to make it a fuller story. And that's what we need.
And that's how I feel. You stated it so eloquently. Thank you. Like, I feel like her story, among many other men and women's, really does enhance the broader narrative of the 18th century. And there's a whole other part of her life that you can read about in my future book. But the fact that you see so much of what's going on in Philadelphia, from the Constitutional Convention to the presidency to the change of presidents, like to John Adams and yellow fever, and just everything with Philadelphia becoming this important cosmopolitan city. She is there throughout all of that. And if you look closely enough, you can see her in every aspect of that. So yes, I think she very much matters. And I think the stories like this matter in the broader context.
And we're thrilled that you're teaching us and others about her.
Yes.
And that she's finally going to get a voice. I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Me
and
too.
you do a great job of bringing her to life. I mean, we talked more about her as a person, her personality, and things like that. Then, I mean, as much time to talk on that as on any of the things that she did specifically, like the big political things. And that approach makes it so much more palatable. I don't know how many people, say to me like, "Oh, when you say it like that, that sounds like fun to learn about," because it is.
Yes, exactly. And that's my approach to history in general. I think you need to make these people come alive. And in studying her, I've realized so much about other historical figures and how funny they were and how real they were. And these were just people too. Her, Samuel, George, Martha, they were all people like we are today. So
I think that's a good place to end as any.
I think that's perfect.
Miss Samantha, thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And where can we find you? Do you have social media? Where can we?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is slsnyder2. And you can also find my website. It's samanthasnyder.org.
And
.org. The .com was taken.
Fancier.
I know .org is fancier.
Sound like an organization.
Unto yourself.
The Samantha Snyder Corporation. But then you can find some writing of mine coming out next year in a book that is being published by University of Virginia Press that Lynn also has.
I was going to say not only yours, but Lynn also has a chapter in that book.
Not only mine, but our dear Dr. Lynn Price's chapter as well.
On Martha Washington, friend of
on Martha
Elizabeth,
Washington. Yes. And and eventually there will be a full book. So,
we're very much looking forward to that.
Yes, we are.
Me too.
Thanks again for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Sam.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the full episode of Too Complicated for History. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, please leave us a review on Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow us on our social platforms at 2C4H_podcast, or check out the link in the description. This will keep you in the loop for show updates, new episodes, and exclusive content. Join us next episode with our guest, Dr. Rosemary Zagari, talking about a guy named Thomas Law and the incredibly famous family he married into.
Too Complicated for History is a podcast from Primary Source Media. Produced by Patrick Long and Lynn Price Robbins. Edited and mixed by Curtis Fritsch. Opening theme music by Sheena Biratella.